So thanks, Gigamon, for inviting us to talk to you about a little bit about what you can do once you actually are decrypting SSL traffic. So, logs provide very little visibility when your tools like IDS, IPS, DLP can actually see the traffic, parse through the traffic. So it's pretty important to be able to have that type of visibility. Also want to talk to you a little bit about what a web shell is. It was pretty key in the Target breach a couple years ago. And we'll also talk about remote access Trojans briefly, as well as command and control traffic and data leakage, like we already touched on. So basically, this is how a little bit about how our solution integrates. We basically receive a stream of traffic, whether it's over virtual or non-SSL use cases or physical network from Gigamon. Passively parse through at up gigabit speeds up to 8-10 gigabits per second. Generate an exorbitant amount of metadata and can alert and do things like behavioral analytics on that metadata. I'd like to quickly touch on why log data alone is not enough. This is from the Verizon data breach report a couple years ago. Basically, less than 1% of breaches are identified with log traffic alone, which is really at the very bottom. So having deep visibility, being able to use behavioral analytics and metadata to identify advanced threats is pretty key.
That less than 1% identified through log traffic, is that through individuals looking at logs, or that's through analytical engines looking at the logs on our behalf?
It's largely log traffic being analyzed or monitored. It's a really low rate of detection, right? So just like this handsome young man getting frisked going through the TSA. Visibility, it's all about visibility, right? That's not that kind of visibility, what we're talking about.
Don't give them any ideas, please.
We're all traveling today.
I'd like a free massage, please.
So have any of y'all heard of web shells before?
No.
So this is a pretty pervasive, very, very common method for advanced adversaries to obtain persistence or just to get in the front door in the first place. So very much like the Target breach, there was an HVAC vendor that was compromised and had a login, had his credentials stolen to a partner portal, where he just at that point had a vulnerability, was able to upload a web shell to basically cycle through that web server and onto the corporate network and move laterally in the target situation. So here's a screenshot from an episode of Mr. Robot. Very large number of web shells exist in Metasploit and all over the internet, so very easy method to persist and to gain access, right? Another pervasive use from adversaries is remote access Trojans. So a lot of them use SSL as a communication protocol. According to Lenny Seltzer, a large percentage of this is standard RFC compliant traffic, but not all of it is. And in many different use cases, we've seen where non-RFC compliant traffic will be blocked, will not be passed through Gigamon. In fact, in my testing, I tried a couple different exploits that happen over SSL, and in those cases, they would establish a connection, and then within a few seconds, it would be killed. It would not pass through the decryptor mechanism. Without SSL decryption, some of the methods that we use within NetWitness when we repackage the sessions is identifying things like fast flux DNS, domain shadowing attacks. We'll look for C2 over Twitter, C2 over DNS. And something that we've started doing is doing entropy analysis, where we calculate randomization of the session stream. And in this particular example, we're setting up an alert where we're looking for variations of entropy for a particular domain. So we'll baseline a domain, let's say Twitter. It's oftentimes it has a particular entropy that really doesn't vary very much, but anytime it goes beyond like 1.5x entropy or randomization for that connection, we can generate an alert for that. Last slide I wanted just to show, talk a little bit about the RSA breach. So I started at RSA. 3 months later, my company, NetWitness, gets acquired, and we get breached at the same time. We were attacked by a nation state beginning with the letter C. Of course, the Canadians came after us.
I was at EMC at the time of the breach.
Were you? Yeah, the end game was to go after Lockheed, but they wanted to compromise us to get there.
How was it Lockheed at the time?
What's that?
How was it Lockheed at the time?
So long story short is phishing attack, navigated over to the secure ID server, came in through a VPN connection with front door, hit the one server on the one port, knew exactly where to go. Thankfully, we were able to identify through packet capture and identify the session with the RAR file that they were trying to exfiltrate. The main problem they had was that the communication channel is not encrypted, so we were able to uncompress and decrypt the RAR file, so we knew exactly which seed files were exfiltrated. But had they encrypted that with SSL, we would have been out of luck. So having that capability, at my point, is very huge. So I just wanted to kind of show you a couple of example web shells. So we have RFC compliant IIS server. So we saw earlier, parsing out the Visa, the MasterCard sessions. But we can look for anomalies within the metadata, similar to direct to IP HTTP request. So here we have some sessions, and you can have the rich metadata where we have executables with header anomalies, HTTP GET, different functions. When we pivot down into the data, we have a couple different ways we can view it. We can try and reconstruct it that way. Here we see an executable being downloaded with the MZ magic header, DOS header, etc. But as we kind of go through these sessions, we can get into, we're parsing basically, a refer or, going directly to an IP address. That's a simple method for identifying it. Maybe we want to look at hidden post messages. So this is where you're using an HTTP form method post rather than doing just a direct post message. So this is a web shell to our IIS server. It is basically a 10-line text file. You've identified a vulnerability. You've uploaded it to the root of the web server. And now I want to issue some commands like net user, for example. Here we've got some other commands that you can, and then here's listing out the user. Then you can also maybe execute some PowerShell commands. And in this particular case, we can kind of sort through. This is the reconstructed view. We can go to ASCII view. As well. And in this particular case, we are trying to download some files over PowerShell.
And this is all over HTTPS?
This is all over HTTPS. Yeah, absolutely. So, even without administrative privileges, we can do things like, hey, I posted PS exec on a botnet, or I've posted a command line scanning tool like Nmap. And now I can execute commands and run scans and move forward with my exploit. So this is very similar to the target breach. Also had a web shell teed up called China Chopper, which we've fingerprinted here on the dashboard. And this is basically a GUI-based web shell. It's a one-line VB script web shell you can place on the root directory, and while this doesn't reconstruct to too much, here we're doing something like volume labels, doing some reconnaissance. But this particular web shell has a GUI. You can move files back and forth really easily, upload, very user-friendly, and you can also execute commands with the command prompt. So being able to parse through this kind of thing at wire speed, generate alerts for web shells is really a huge gap that a lot of security tools would not have without the SSL decryption is the basic net of it. All right?
That's fair.
So.